Welcome to Dairy Livestream, brought to you by Hoard's Dairyman. I'm your host, Corey Geiger, managing editor of Hoard's Dairyman. We're broadcasting from the Cheese Cave, our studio in downtown Fort Atkinson, at the historic W.D. Hoard & Sons Company, and its building commissioned by Wisconsin Governor W.D. Hoard. We have an exciting episode planned for this week. We are accounting for every nickel during COVID-19. Today's guests have decades of experience as innovative dairymen and thought leaders in the dairy community. Before we introduce our first guest, we're going to go to our first poll question. Our producer, Jim Baltz, can put that on the screen. It's a prelude to the discussion that we're going to have today. That poll question is, what area of your dairy received the most scrutiny as you look to tighten your budgets? You can select one answer because we're looking for most here. Nutrition, animal health, dry cows and heifers, employees and personnel, equipment, and maintenance. So we'll go ahead and give a little bit of time here for our audience to go ahead and answer that question. And we have a real good crowd here early on in the broadcast, and looking forward to having a healthy and vigorous discussion with our three guests here. So we'll give this a couple more seconds here. We're at 40% voted here. We'll cut it off in 10 seconds. This will be interesting. We have one category that is leading by far. And so some of our guests know, or listeners, that we do a dress rehearsal a day before just to talk about these things. And Gordie, and John, you're going to be spot on with what some of the things you're going to talk about. Jim, let's go ahead and cut it off. And nutrition topped the list at 49%. Early on, animal health was not getting any votes, but it did come in at the bottom there at 9%. And equipment and maintenance was a second place. With that now in mind here, let's welcome John Mueller of Willow Farm to Dairy Livestream. John is a second-generation New York dairyman and comes from one of the most ingenious dairy farm families that I know. During my very first trip as an editor of Hoard's Dairyman some 25 years ago, I met John's father, George, and we had a deep and thought-provoking conversation. My mind was more of a sponge as I absorbed George's thoughts, John's father. John is in the same vein, establishing innovative employee practices and keeping a keen eye on the farm ledger. These days, John heads up a team of 75 employees that manage some 4,500 cows on their family's 3 New York dairy farms. John, what has been your farm's experience in dealing with the health and financial concerns of COVID-19? Welcome to the broadcast.
Thanks for having me, Corey. It is an honor and a privilege to be on this webinar. This is the first one I've done, so it's kind of a new adventure, and pretty high-powered group you put together here. So to answer your question, we'll start with people. We focus on people a lot at Willow Bend. And of course, the virus made us change a few things, and we didn't go super crazy, but we did have to set up a quarantine house. Fortunately, we haven't had to use that. We did do some social distancing, so lunch breaks and things like that were separate for a time. I have to admit, it's kind of drifted back together again. Meetings are done differently. A lot of Zoom, or get very familiar with Zoom and things like that. A lot of emphasis on washing your hands, and if you're sick, stay home, things like that. So that kind of the way we have our meetings, the way we take our breaks together, those kind of things have changed. But I have to admit, as things have calmed down here in New York, we're kind of drifting back to our old routine. And the last round of dairy team meetings we had, I did interview a lot of our employees, and nobody except for one, I found out today, has ever ran into somebody with the virus. So it's kind of a low prevalence in Clifton Springs, New York. So we haven't gone crazy, and we haven't had any problems, knock wood, on the people end. Now, on the financial end, the cow end, I'm going to say the cow end is relatively unchanged. Of course, you look at all those things, and to your poll question, the easiest thing to do is beat up the nutritionist and tell him that, hey, we got to do things different because the price is this and things are bad. And so you go through that. That's kind of the first thing you do. But then you kind of work through your whole budget and have a budget, right? So that's a big part of it. You got to have a budget and look through that. And with the help of benchmarking, you know where you should be compared to the competition. And you go to that benchmark and you say, okay, we're weak in these 3 or 4 things. And you look at those things. And in our case, this year, we're looking at labor, bedding, custom hire, we call it. This is people that come in and help you spread manure and chop your feed. And what was the 4th one? Breeding. So we focused on those. And I was told a long time ago that if you focus on something, it traditionally gets better. So we have made some strides in our labor and bedding. We're not doing well in custom hire and breeding. So, but we are working on it, and we know that's kind of some of those target areas that we need to go to. Some of the other things we do is it's not a bad time to negotiate new contracts and new relationships. If you've been with the same company for seed, for example, for years and years and years, now is a good time to say, hey, I know we've got a great relationship. I know it's comfortable. I know we work great together, but these are tough times and drastic times need drastic measures. So you put that out for bid where you haven't done that before, and can you save some money? And can you? And I guess this is a kind of an economist question. Can you afford to prepay your seed corn if you get a 10% discount when you don't have a lot of extra working capital? So those are some of the things that you play with. Do you get the discount, but then do you have to save that working capital for later when things get tight and you need money to pay your bills and you can't borrow it anymore because you got all tied up in seed that's still in the bag? So those are some things that we work on. We through the whole team and all these meetings, we communicate a lot about, to be the low cost producer is the one that survives. So you got to watch this and fight waste. So I think how am I doing on time? Am I running too long?
You're good.
All right. So those are kind of on the expense side. We'll talk a little bit about the revenue side. Traditionally, well, for my whole life, my whole career, and my dad's whole career, we have not been a participant in insurance or risk management. Our philosophy has always been, if you have a strong balance sheet, then that's your risk management. So lately, with the purchase of our 3rd farm, our balance sheet isn't quite as strong as it used to be. So then, so now we're jealous of Gordie Jones and some of my neighbors that got involved in the DRP and actually did really well. So now we have to take a strong look at that and maybe abandon our philosophy for the last 60 years on the strong balance sheet will protect you and go into some of this risk management stuff. So that's on the revenue side. We are talking about doing some risk management on labor. Some of your key employees, can you tie them up? Labor is tight pretty much across the country, especially management. So can you tie them up in 5 or 10-year contracts to kind of hold on to them so that you don't lose them to the competition, so that you can have that core group of people that are going to carry your business into the next generation. So we are trying to do some of that risk management as well. The other thing that we talked about is our milk market. Our milk market on the revenue side, we ship milk to upstate Niagara, and that has been a tremendous blessing for us, our business, and the rest of the members that belong. It's not a huge cooperative, but it's in Western New York, about 350 members. Very diversified, from butter powder to fluid milk and all the things in between. So they've been a strong market for us, and they have not asked us to cut back or make any changes in the way we produce milk. So we're very blessed to have that, and they have paid good returns in what they call a 13-check profit sharing every April. So we've been blessed to have that market, and that's really come through for us. So that's what I've got so far to start us off. Thank you, Corey.
Thank you, John. And we got a real specific question to you that came in from the audience. We'll take this one right away. John, where do you get your benchmarking from, or where do you get the comparisons? What group?
All right. So good question. So we use two groups, and it's super handy that they work together. So we use the Farm Credit East benchmark, pretty in-depth, kind of intensive survey that they send out, and that dovetails with Chris's farm benchmark through Cornell University. So they use our numbers for both, and so Chris's is quite a bit bigger and more general. It's got smaller farms and larger farms, and so we use both of those benchmarks to help us pinpoint where we're weak and where we need to improve.
Well, thank you, John. And we're gonna, as a reminder to our audience here, you can ask questions as you hear our speakers, and we have some that are coming in already, and we will ask those in the second half of our broadcast today. Before we introduce our next guest to Dairy Livestream, let's go to another poll question. And the question is this: how did you alter employee management during COVID-19? Select one of the following: not at all, small personal protection equipment, PPE changes, significant shifts in PPE and labor assignments, on-farm and off-farm employee restrictions, and some of that could be travel and those kind of things. And as we're waiting for the audience to select those answers, I want to follow up with John's discussion there when he's talking about labor contracts. Those are kind of incentive contracts that reward really talented employees on their farm. And if people have questions on that later on, they can ask those as well. So we got almost 40% of the audience here. We're going to give everybody about 5 more seconds here to give an answer on this question here. So Jim, let's go ahead and cut that one off here, and we'll show the results here. And a little bit all over here. We got 20% nothing at all, and then we had some personal protection equipment devices, small changes at 34%, and then all the way to the other end with some on-farm and off-farm employee restrictions here. So I'm looking forward here. We're going to introduce our next guest, Gordie Jones. In my mind, he's one of the world's most renowned cow comfort gurus. After practicing veterinary medicine for 22 years, Gordie became a technical service specialist for the Monsanto dairy team for 3 years. From there, he worked for quality milk sales as a production consulting specialist and a nutritionist. During that journey, he helped design Fair Oaks Dairy in Indiana and the famous birthing barn that fascinates the public. Gordie did such a great job on that design, getting cows to calve behind glass showcase or glass bubble, that we copied it for the Farm Wisconsin Discovery Center, in which I served as the capital campaign co-chair here a few years back. Gordie then put his money where his mouth is and started Central Sands Dairy. That's why Gordie is on the program today as a dairyman. Gordie, how have you dealt with the pandemic?
First of all, thanks for inviting me, everyone, and tickled pink to be here with Hoards and the rest of you. Honored to be here. One other small note on that birthing barn. I was the first one to say, let's not do it. And I sat there at a meeting saying, you're going to drag my cows 2 miles while they're in stage 2 labor and bring them into an aquarium and show the public how they calve. I went, whoa, wait a minute. And Mike McCloskey told me, he said, yours isn't here to say no, yours is here to say, how do we do it well? And so then I dove into the project. And also we did 2 years of study afterwards, comparing the cows that came to the public and how they milked compared to the cows that didn't take a ride on the fast delivery wagon to the public. And in fact, we found no difference between those cows at all that calved for the public and the ones who calved for us privately alone. So we were pretty happy about that data. And I got to credit Mike for forcing me into helping that a lot. As a dairyman, I want to back up. You know, one of the things I feel like is achieving excellence is something I've hammered on. So when this COVID thing hit, first of all, to what John said, we have always, as a group, been locking in feed prices and locking in milk prices to assure ourselves at least a margin. You can't go broke if you're making a profit, is one of our sayings internally. So we've always been there. This was a year that we had forecasted for the highest milk prices coming up, and I was probably voting not to lock in milk prices in January. We locked them in, and suddenly in February and March, we looked like geniuses while I was fighting the cost in January. And so we sat there with that. As I review dairies, or particularly my own and then others, I divided into, you can't save your way to making money. We have to make milk. So how are the things that make us the most profit quickly for me? And that's always nutrition. How do I get an extra pound of milk out of the ration I'm feeding? Cow comfort. How do I lay a cow down for an extra hour? That'll give us, right now, the data will show us it'll give us 3.5 to 4 pounds of milk in most of the pens. But over there in the fresh pen and the close-up pen, some internal data from the cow comfort girls at Novus show us that an extra hour in bed in the fresh pen's worth 5 pounds more milk. Boy, it sure makes that cow comfort I started to talk about in 1986 sound just as important today as it did then. So cow comfort's a huge thing we're doing. And then I saw on the first questions, what are we doing about health? Well, health comes from, most of our problems happen in the fresh cows. So health comes from the dry cow ration. What are you doing to prepare that cow to freshen? All of my problems have a first and last name on the dairy. That is either the nutritionist, the feeder, Peter Jones, or somebody else has messed up and caused the problem with my cows. So yesterday's review at our dairy was, we milked 3,500 cows on the rotary. In fact, it was 3,516. And we had 9 cows in the hospital. And all of them were simply mastitis, either just diagnosed or recovering from their antibiotic. And those were the only cows in the hospital. So reducing those fresh cow problems, reducing milk fever, mastitis, reducing ketosis, DAs, and our P's, metritis, is locked into that dry cow program. So when we started this review for COVID, we were looking for what was happening with procedural drift. In fact, if I get more than 2 DAs in a month, I'm looking at procedural drift again. So back to our feeder. Is he on target and not creating waste, either waste that doesn't get to the feed wagon or waste that goes through the feed wagon? How accurate is he? So we reviewed the scales, we reviewed his procedures, we reviewed face management, and then like John said, it was grabbing the feed company, our real nutritionist. Our rations are really based on my philosophies, but I have somebody else do the math. And are we on target, or have we hung too many ornaments in the ration? Have we hung too many additives? The Mike Hutchins 4 R's. It was, okay, what did we put in this ration and why is it in there? The things we have kept in there have been rumensin, bicarb, and then we've got to look at almost everything else we've added. If we do a good job of face management, a good job of forage management, those things that I, as a nutritionist, have always had in my toolbox don't necessarily end up in my ration if I'm good at it. Those things like bentonites, like mycotoxin binders. If I can keep my mycotoxin binders, if I can keep my face management right, my pile management, we've got those out. And so after reviewing our feed additives, we reviewed our feeder. And then the personnel, our feeder, who works 5 to 6 days a week, became the center focus of our first isolation. He was not to talk to anybody during the first parts of COVID. He was to get his information off the phone. He could get his cow numbers. He could get it offline. he could get everything. I wanted him as isolated as could be because I didn't need him not there for 14 days. In fact, he's just taken a vacation where he came back from the COVID hotspot, and we isolated him back on the farm again. That is, for 14 days, he wasn't allowed near anybody else on the farm, but he could still feed our cows. So we were busy doing that. Find out where I put my glasses. And then what we did with our personnel was, besides a few PPPs, you know, nobody's wearing a mask on a dairy farm. We've got too much work to do and whatever. But because of our rotary, because of everything else, we're easily able to social distance. And then we have a lot of Mexicans, and they are truly Mexicans at our place, who share housing together. So we shifted the shifts so that a house was on the same shift. And if we hit a disease, COVID-19, we could have the same shift exposed and not the other shift. So we've done some things with personnel. If I look at things on nutrition, we reviewed whether or not we're feeding low rations, how many pens are low rations. If you look at your herd, if you've got a 4-pen herd, I might look at that low pen and decide how good my cows are doing in there. And if your cows are fat, let's fix repro. And let's kick that ration up another notch. We feed low rations across the country to save money and not get fat cows. When in fact, oftentimes, if we feed the high ration to the low cows, I'll get more money. And feeding the high ration will make the cows milk more, give them a little keto boost, sort of an Atkins diet with higher protein, and they lose weight. So I'm a huge proponent in small herds of single TMRs that work well. And as I look at it, I've probably hit the main topics and ready to really sit here and ask what's out there on our dairyman's mind. So go ahead, Corey.
Gordie, I got one follow-up question, and a lot of our dairy live stream broadcasts have been waiting to ask this one. I do know from yesterday's conversation during our dress rehearsal that John, and he said it, did not have to dump any milk. And Gordie, you didn't either, but you have some friends, fellow farmers that had a cutback. And you had talked about a little bit of that yesterday. Some had a cutback up to 20%. Some and then others, when they employed that strategy, some dried some cows off early, or they went back from trying to get 100 pounds per cow to 110. Just and maybe a minute or less, talk a little bit about that, because I know our viewers are going to be very interested.
Yeah, so I had a couple of conversations right here in Northeast Wisconsin. COVID-19 has given us winners, losers. Some of the dairy industry has, where they process their milk, went into places like string cheese, and the moms who kept their kids home were buying string cheese by the boatload, and those plants tried to up their production. And then plants like Land O'Lakes asked people to cut back a few percent. Other people who were dealing in fresh mozzarella were cutting back 20%. My dairymen that called me for advice were in two boats in cutting milk. One was they would rather throw the milk away and hope that there was a government payment and they could record the milk that was thrown away, much easier than milk they dropped. Whereas others said, okay, I'm going to drop production. And they had two choices: to do something to their total ration, or again head to that low pen. And if we had an 8-pen system, we took the 1 pen and we fed it the dry cow ration. We filled those cows up, lots of fiber, no energy, the cows were healthy, and there was nothing to make milk with. So those pens crashed, and then we put them through the Goldilocks dry cow program, and we were fine. So those guys were able to drop it. I did have one or two good dairymen who just cut the top off their milk. These were guys getting 108 to 110 pounds a cow. They dropped back 10% to 100 pounds. And today they're sitting there mad as heck because milk prices back up, their processors want milk, and now they can't hit the herd up again. And I said, look, we got to wait till we get 90 days worth of new fresh cows to make milk. You've heard everybody along that curve. So there were all kinds of opportunities and all kinds of decisions made. The ones that make the cows the healthiest to me are we can cut production by feeding a really high fiber, low cow, dry cow diet to some cows. In fact, my 3 years in the Pacific Northwest up at Whidbey Island, we lost power for 3 complete days on small herds up there, and we fed them nothing but the dry cow ration. And now nobody had udder pressure, nobody got mastitis, and we got them back in milking. So if you're looking to cut production in a small group of cows, that's usually my recommendation. Let's feed that fiber ration.
Thank you, Gordie. We're going to do one more poll question here, and Jim Baltz, our producer, will put that up for us. What risk management tools have you used before? Check all that apply. Forward feed contracting, milk futures contracts, dairy margin coverage program, DMC, dairy revenue protection, DRP, or none at all. So go ahead and answer those questions. And as we're doing that, a reminder, if you have questions for John, Gordie, or Chris Wolf, please go ahead and type those into the panel, and we will be taking those in a few minutes. So again, go ahead and answer that poll question. We're getting, and you can check all that apply here on this one, and people have figured that out real quickly here because we're getting a significant percentages here. And DMC is leading the pack, but there's 4 answers on its heels. So let's go ahead and cut that poll off. And DMC was number 1 there, but DRP, forward feed contracting, and milk futures contracts were all right there, and only 17% at none at all. So a lot of interest in risk mitigation. And with that, Chris, let's welcome you back to Dairy Livestream. And Chris, risk mitigation goes far beyond milk prices. It involves feed, service contracts, biosecurity or herd health, and even labor. Let's talk about how farmers can mitigate price risk.
Thanks, Corey. Happy to be here. Yeah, as you say, there's dairy farmers face a lot of different types of risk. There's kind of a tendency sometimes to think about milk price risk as being what we're talking about when we talk about risk management. But as these 2 excellent managers here that have talked have explained, there's a lot of other things going on with herd health and human resource management and other things. And risk management kind of generally is being proactive, okay? Proactively recognizing the potential for adverse outcomes and then taking steps to either minimize the likelihood of those adverse outcomes occurring or minimize the effect of them if they do occur. And then both of these farm managers are excellent examples of that. One thing I'm struck by when both John and Gordie talk is how they're always looking to learn new things, either from others or by digging into their own data. And really digging into data, it's kind of like the Moneyball version, right? You guys familiar with Moneyball in baseball with the Oakland A's? And you look at the dairy farm managers today, and that's what you're doing, right? You're the most precious thing a dairy farm manager has is their management time. And so where can they focus that to make the biggest effect? And these guys are doing that, and they're digging in to make the marginal changes that have the biggest payoff. As far as milk price risk, right, it seems like we're off of the tilt-a-whirl that we were on from 2015 through 2019 and back on the roller coaster. And the tilt-a-whirl wasn't much fun, but the roller coaster is not a whole lot of fun a lot of times either here. It was brought up earlier in the dress rehearsal, and then earlier this morning, John was talking about what do the government payments, the PPP and the CFAP payments do as far as incentive for risk management. And, economists for a long time have worried about what do these disaster payments that are what we would call ad hoc payments. So they kind of come in depending on what the political situation is happening. What do those do to the incentive for risk management? And I think it's an excellent point. If you think Uncle Sam is going to come in when you have a disaster, why should you spend your time, your money, your effort doing risk management? And I guess, and it's an excellent question. One thing I would say is, even given the PPP and CFAP payments, if you did DMC and DRP this year, you came out ahead. So even there was a return to doing those risk management activities. And what we see kind of over time is if you have a risk management plan that you consistently execute and follow, that's when the risk management pays, right? Because by definition, we don't know what's going to happen. We're always making a decision given the kind of best information we have at the time. Gordie said, hey, maybe 2020 looks like a great year, which, we came into 2020 we thought really well balanced for dairy markets nationally and internationally. And we were looking at a really great price year, we hoped, and we kind of forecasted, right? Who foresaw this once in a generation, hopefully once in a lifetime occurrence? And so, that's exactly the kind of event that you're helping to manage when you do risk management. What we find when we talk to farmers about price risk management in particular is the primary reasons that dairy farmers don't use milk price risk management is lack of knowledge. There's certainly a learning curve when you're figuring out the different tools and how do you allocate your time. The second one would be management time. If you have a management team, then maybe you can divide up the responsibilities there, and one person or a couple people can focus more on the risk management aspect, and that is an advantage actually to having a management team. And then the third thing is that farmers believe, and not incorrectly, that they belong to a co-op, and the co-op's job is to market milk, and that their best use of management time is someplace else. And that might be the right decision for your farm. I think it kind of really depends on what your financial situation is, and what your kind of personal risk preferences are, and where you can best allocate your management time. But I think that these two gentlemen and their management teams are excellent examples of kind of how we can learn and approach these things.
Thank you, Chris. We have a number of questions rolling in here, and picking the order that we're going to start with, since we're just coming off of talking about milk prices and that, let's take this question. How are your projections reflecting how long these milk price swings will last? And I'm assuming the reader or viewer here is asking related to COVID-19. So I'll repeat that one. How are your projections reflecting how long these milk price swings will last? And maybe, Chris, you might want to take that out of the gate, and then we can hear from John and Gordie.
Yeah, sure, Corey. You know what? So you're watching the markets today. Yesterday and today, if you're looking at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, you're seeing that we've been shedding some price there in August, September, October in particular. And the markets are kind of searching for a balance there, and looking at these COVID numbers and looking at what Congress is doing or not doing, and whether this unemployment insurance is going to continue. And at what level, and if it doesn't, what does that mean for demand, right? Because if we're thinking about this from an economics point of view, obviously dairy products are a staple and the demand will continue, but that doesn't mean that it will continue at the same level if we have a big income effect in the economy. So another situation where, the risk management is important as far as understanding your cost of production, what your cash flow coverage number is, and thinking about, as Gordie said, locking in that margin there, if you can make it work for you, and removing some of that uncertainty. But I'd be delighted to hear what they have to say.
So I'll jump in, and I can only tell you what I hear from the economists. So looks like that we can count on volatility in the milk markets forever. So it's going to go up and it's going to go down, and I think that that volatility is not going to change. And in the near future, it looks like we got a nice increase in prices here, and then it's going to fall off to the first of the year, and then next year it looks so far. Correct me if I'm wrong. Another tough year. So that's what they're predicting on the pricing. That's what I'm hearing and reading anyway. You guys got anything different?
Nothing different here.
So Gordie talked about this during his opening remarks here, and I'll set this up a little bit. Gordie, the question to you is going to be coming, and certainly Chris and John can chime in here. Gordie, how are you looking at next year with the current price volatility for DRP contracts for the next year? They seem expensive. Now, my brother-in-law who dairy farms and has milks with robots, we went through that journey and signed DRP contracts for the remainder of the year here. And now he's going to put in new robots, but he just started working on that this week. But part of that journey is securing a profit, knowing your other costs, and that's where the DRP contracts came in, and that gave him confidence to go ahead with that next generation of robots. So let's come back to this, Gordie, and what are you looking at next year? You're doing price risk mitigation, and you touching those DRPs yet?
No, our whole team is focused on feed cost first and milk price, locking in milk price second. So we haven't done much with that. I'd leave it to others that are in my team to better illustrate what we did. But simply back to what we talked about at the boat, focus on labor, I'm back to our facilities, and new facilities are focusing on how do we do things with less labor? How do we do things more effectively? And then how do we have cows that we don't eat up labor? So how do we get things done easily with one person? And then back to milk price, lock in milk price and get our best feed contracts. So I don't have anything to add. I don't have any magic there. Sorry, guys.
Chris, you want to add in on that one right now or not?
Yeah, I think so. Like you were talking about, that DRP seems a bit expensive, right, for 2021. And I think when you think about pricing an insurance contract, you start by calculating what we would call an actuarially fair premium, which is kind of setting the premium at what the expected loss would be, and then the government kicks in some of the premium subsidy there, and that's what makes crop insurance, and DRP is an example of crop insurance, a good deal and an effective tool. But you've got to start by setting that premium, and I think the high premium next year is just reflecting the extreme amount of uncertainty. Are we still going to be dealing with the pandemic issues next year here or even abroad, because the international markets are important also. And so that leads to a higher premium because that uncertainty gets priced into that.
Mm-hmm. And one of our audience members, his candid question is what's behind the CME price crash this week? I'd hesitate to use the word crash because these markets are searching and they're searching. I mean, our cheese prices are almost $10, equivalent higher if you extrapolate that out per hundredweight. Than New Zealand here. And so you have a lot of, in our markets here on cheese in the United States, 95% of it's domestic, where you go, as we talked about our dairy live stream a couple weeks ago, skim milk powders, and half of that gets exported. So this is going to be a volatile time here on these markets just because they keep searching. Chris, anything to add on that? You're deeper in it than I.
Well, I think that's a really good explanation, Corey. And I would say, that the live stream from 2 weeks ago is still really relevant, to what's going on right now. I thought that both presenters, both from Jacoby and from Cayuga Milk Ingredients, did an excellent job of explaining what's going on. And, we're watching that fresh cheese market and trying to, figure out the situation exactly.
John, we're going to take this question to you here. I'm searching for it. It was an early one here. What are a few of the most effective ways to retain your most talented employees? And you talked about that some, and I think the viewers here want to hear that again. And then Gordie can add in on that one.
All right. So obviously there's 1,000 things you can do. Some of the things that we have done and hope to do, I guess. So an obvious one is your key employees, you turn them into owners, right? So if they're really that good and that great and part of your future, you give them a piece of the action and skin in the game and share the profits or in some cases losses with them. And that ownership piece really gets them engaged and involved in what's going on. So beyond that, if you've got some key employees that are really doing well, you want to keep them learning, keep them growing, keep them challenged. You got to throw things out there, new responsibilities. So herdsmen, we had recently, we sent them to ultrasound school. So now they're doing all our ultrasounds, breeding school. So we got people doing the breeding on farm. So you keep them engaged and keep them excited about what's going on the farm. Another way to keep people excited about what's going on is to grow. And as you grow and add cows and add acres, you add people, and those people need new responsibilities. And so if you were milking cows yesterday, you could be feeding calves today, or feeding cows, or plowing fields, because there's openings. And as you grow, those openings open up, and then you tend to have that long-term employee that can be there for 20, 25, 30 years. So those are some of the things that we've been doing successfully. Not always successful, right? We have had 20-some-year employees leave for better jobs and better deals. So, and we have some really good people get stolen by the neighbors. I mean, that happens, and kind of the other way around too. So we've got some employees that work for the neighbor farms as well. So is that kind of what you're looking for?
Mm-hmm. Gordie, anything to add in that realm?
Yeah, as I give my talks around the world, I always talk about whether I'm in Beijing, whether I'm in Paris, or whether I'm in Oklahoma. I go into a McDonald's to see what's happening there. And because McDonald's does three things amazingly well. It's clean and bright, and the French fries are hot. And they do it with the lowest end employees. I tell people they do it with the lowest entry level employee, either the young, the old, or the uneducated. And I often say the young, the old, or the dumb. And at our dairy, so it's all about standard operating procedures. If McDonald's can do it with the young, the old, and the uneducated, we can do it. And so everybody at our place has to know their job. And if they know their job, whether they're a milker, whether they're a cow pusher, whether they're the herdsman, the feeder, they're given a test on their job. And when they pass that test, they're given a pay raise. So that means they know their SOP because they passed the test on their SOP. And now they're certified in their job. They're a certified milk technician. They're a certified feeder. They're a certified herdsman who can treat cows, ultrasound, who can do everything we need. So by just what John says, by having them, I go back to my uncle's dairy farm in southern Ontario. Half the industry knows this and the other half doesn't. I'm a city kid from Detroit. So I'm not even a first generation farmer. I'm the second half generation of my age farmer. But my mom's first cousins in Elmer, Ontario had 25 cow dairies, and I started to spend the summer there. And my job description from my uncle was, don't let me catch you standing still. So now all I knew is I had to move. I wasn't quite sure what he wanted me to do. At our dairy, everybody knows what we want to do and how we develop people. We look to our cow pusher to be our most developed guy. That is, he sees every cow every day, 2 to 3 times a day. I want him to identify lame cows, sick cows. I want him to identify cows in heat, and then he'll become my next herdsman. So we're about people development, like John is. We're about a risk reward. We offer a 401k package that we contribute to. And we do what John does. We try to develop them with incentives and then with, I can't think of the name. You have to be vested in it long enough to stay with us. And so we do those things to develop people. But the beauty of my people is when I go there, they're all smiling. If you know your job, you're happy because you know the boss isn't going to be yelling at you. I don't want to see you standing still. They're doing their job and they're happy at it. And I'm pretty happy that we've got about 20 to 25%, maybe 35% of the people I started and built that dairy with are all there in their key positions. And I just don't have that many people there, team. So I'm pretty thrilled about that.
Thank you, Gordie. And I'm glad you shared that you didn't grow up on a dairy farm. You know, we talk about this in our industry, that there's not as many farm kids, but look at the great things you've done. And you've learned your skills over time, and nobody that didn't know that story would ever have imagined that you weren't born and raised on a dairy farm. So thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
This is a question for John and Gordie here, and you discussed removing rations, changing rations to remove unneeded costs as we moved into April and May. How quickly did you look to add back a cost-effective ration as the milk price rebounded dramatically into June and July? So talk about that journey.
All right, so I can confess. So it seems like we do this more often lately than we used to. So 2016 was a tough year, and then 2018 we did it again, and here we are in 2020 doing it a third time recently. And in those years we have taken things out and never put them back in. Some examples would be like the binders that Gordie talked about, a lot of other products that go in there. But I will confess that there's times that we take something out and then the cows get worse and the train comes off the rails and we have to put it back in. So on the bad side, you pick the wrong thing to take out, but on the good side, at least you know that you're spending money wisely and that's stuff that you really needed. So you got to kind of be careful what you take out, what you put back in, or what you don't take out. So we've done it kind of all ways, and you kind of go back to your basics and you try and reduce it to the minimal and without hurting your herd, right? And then you kind of do it in steps. And hey, do we really need this protein or this additive or that additive? And then you kind of, yes, as price gets better, they slip in, whether you like it or not, they slip in. And I like Gordie's hanging ornaments on the tree. And all of a sudden your tree is falling over because you got so many ornaments on it. And then you get a pandemic and you can clean the tree up, start all over again.
Yeah. Okay, so first of all, I probably feed cows differently than a lot of people in that I don't feed them for production. I don't balance for a 90-pound ration, an 80-pound ration, a 100-pound ration. I balance for the forages we make, and I maximize that forage into a mouthful. And once it's balanced, think about this. If you're truly balancing a 95-pound ration, how do you get a cow to milk 160 pounds? We don't have a 160-pound ration. She has to eat more of that ration. So truly what we do at our dairy is balance for mouthfuls. We make healthy mouthfuls that have the right rate of passage based on our forage. So when we review our ration, every 2 weeks, we're getting a new forage analysis to give us digestibility and NDF and give us our NDFs so that we can rebalance if we need to. And then we made sure our additives that were added were in there and necessary. Those things that we haven't pulled out would be rumensin, monensin, ionophore. We haven't pulled out bicarb. And last year, I'm very blessed for our dairy that we ended up in the Central Sands. Being in the Central Sands, we control some of the rain that Wisconsin gets. And we have sand that we can get on in spite of bad weather. So when we have a fall where half of the fields are flooded, I'm still out there harvesting at the right dry matter and moistures for my forages. That gives us a lot more control in not having forages that vary up and down in being too dry, having bad fermentation, which means one of those reviews again, I was asked just this week from Europe whether or not I use inoculants. And the answer is absolutely. I want a uniform forage package out of our corn silage and haylage where we're at. And that's what we do. So I balance for a mouthful, I feed a single TMR, and then I go on for that. In fact, it's pretty easy at our dairy. And then we make sure there's nothing extra hanging in that ration.
Thank you, Gordie. Our next question we're going to direct to Chris here. And as I ask that question and look forward to hearing Chris's response, I'm going to also bring up a previous dairy live stream that will help answer that as well. The question is, are dairies going to have a difficulty getting loans if they don't have price risk management in play? And we have our past dairy live streams on our website, www.hoards.com. You just look for dairy live stream. It's right there on the homepage. And our May 20th broadcast was Dairy Farm Finance Pivot with Sam Mueller, Managing Director of Agriculture Banking from BMO Harris, and Roger Murray, Executive Vice President of Farm Credit East. And Chris was on that program. And Chris, my memory is that they were talking about, as we were just coming out of some of this bottom end pandemic when the markets hit $1 per pound for cheese on April 28th. And they said, you better darn believe that our clients better be looking at this. And but the question is, are dairies going to have difficulty getting loans?
That's an excellent question. I think it might be, I might flip it on its head a little bit. I might say it might be easier to get loans if you have a good risk management program that you can show that you have protected a milk price. If you're protecting, I mean, if you think about it from the lender's perspective, loaning money is all about risk management, right? It's all about picking the right loans to make that are going to get you a return and not default. So, you know, if you're lending to clients that have locked in a feed and milk price margin, at least some minimum margin, you know, it stands to reason if they're doing it effectively that there's less risk involved there. So I would think my sense of it from talking to lenders is that many of them are looking at factors like this when they're considering loans, and doing things like that might A, help you get a loan, and B, help keep you in a lower risk class, which might facilitate everything else equal, a less risk premium, which means a better interest rate. So I think, you know, I don't know that it's required. You know, lenders are looking at capital debt repayment capacity. They're looking at your solvency and liquidity situations, but certainly it's going to help.
Yep, and to bring this bundle together, you know, it's a state of mind too. Is it price risk management, or is it like John has been doing a lot of benchmarking, maybe not so much on the milk price risk management side, but a lot on the feed, and Gordie looking at it both ways. So part of this, your loan officer is looking for a state of mind. Do you have a handle on your cost of production? Do you have a vision for your future? Do you have some of this stuff written down? I mean, those are really the dynamics that a loan officer is going to be looking at here. We have about 9 minutes left in the broadcast, and we have a lot of questions here. So a couple of these I'm going to do rapid fire here. And this is from a California dairyman that routinely is on our program, and he wants to know what kind of inoculants you use. So Gordie, if you want to answer that one real quickly.
Yeah, just simple LAB, lactic acid bacillus. So we have fresh feed. We don't need a Buchnerai. We don't need, we're not transporting feed. It's not sitting there a long time getting hot. So I'm just happy with somebody's good researched LAB, lactic acid bacillus. And we're happy in that area.
Okay. And then, go ahead, John.
So the brand we use is Silosol. It comes from a local seed dealer, and sounds like it's similar to what Gordie's using.
Another rapid fire question here. Do your farms request all your employees to wear masks while working with each other, or are you using social distancing?
Distancing. Our jobs are lucky. The only two people together might be our herdsmen who do the breeding and whatnot, and we keep keeping them apart. One of them walks to the cows and the other takes the vehicle. We're lucky our milkers are apart because we're on a rotary, we're not in a pit. So we can, they were social distance based on where the cows have to be on the rotary. So, and our feeders alone, we have one feeder who feeds 35, well, he feeds 4,200 cows total. So we do it from there. There's just not many people at our dairy.
John?
So so they're not required to wear masks, but some do. And the ones that do wear the masks are in the parlor, and we have parallel parlors. We don't have rotary, so they are quite close together, but there's no requirement.
Are you, big picture, and again, we're in rapid fire, short responses, what challenges are you facing perhaps with any vendors, perhaps getting custom harvesting done, breeding done? Have you had to change anything, how your farmer interacts with those vendors?
So the biggest problem we have is getting parts for equipment. And I don't know if they're just blaming the virus because their things are back ordered, or it actually is the virus. So other than that, the feed and everything else, animal health stuff is pretty good. I guess lately we're going to run short on latex gloves, so we're worried about that.
We've seen no difference other than exactly what John said, was people getting parts. Just no difference at all. Feed gets delivered. I can't think of anything else.
Chris, this rapid fire is for you. Can a strong balance sheet and low cost of production replace the cost of insurance premiums such as DRP and DMC? Now, that's a loaded question, but try to handle it in rapid fire.
That's a good question, right? I mean, so I assume we're thinking about from a lender's perspective, Corey. Like I said, the lenders are going to have their models they're looking at for probability of default that they're going to look at multiplying by the value of the loan. So they're thinking about the expected loss or the possibility of an expected loss. And it's going to be a function of the capital debt repayment capacity, which is related to liquidity. It's going to be a solvency. It's going to be working capital. It's going to be collateral. But it's also going to be things like what kind of relationship they have with the farm, how long they've been working with them, and also just their own assessment of management ability. And that's where the things like, John and Gordie have been talking about come into play, where they're meticulous and they're planning and they have a vision and they can express it. So, lending standards have evolved over time because the lenders kind of got burned in the 1980s. But, not everybody has to do price risk management, I guess. That was not short. Sorry, Corey.
No worries. Gordie, you've consulted all around the world with herds of various sizes, and a longtime listener to the program asked this question. I think you can handle it. Any advice for us small dairy farmers under 100 cows? What that we can do that's special and unique right now?
Yeah, the things that pay the immediate payback is one more bite of feed, 1 more hour in bed, and can I get to feed and can I get to bed? And so as I look at little facilities and whatnot, I came to Wisconsin. One of the real ironies of the world is I'm a freestall expert worldwide. I came to Wisconsin because we had tie stall barns and I hated freestalls. I left Michigan all those years ago because I hated freestalls. They were damp, dark, dirty, wet, dirty places. And so just making cows comfortable. So it's back to, if I can get her to eat 1 more bite, you get 2.5 pounds more milk for whether it's a kilo or a dry matter pound. And if I can get her to lay down 1 more hour, go fix those things on your small dairy. And those of you with small dairies, it was an old quote that dairying run as a business is a great way of life. That's why I came to Wisconsin, because of our way of life. But dairy farming run as a way of life is a very poor business. So run it as a business, no matter what size you're at, and fix those facilities. Stand to milk, stand to eat, go to bed. How do I get to eat? How do I get to bed? How can I lay down longer? And how can I eat more?
Thank you, Gordie. During dress rehearsal yesterday, Andy Novakovic and Mark Stevenson joined us as well, and they didn't ask this question here. It's actually from another reader, and it almost came exactly the way Mark said it. So I think we might end with this one. And John and Gordie and Chris can all talk about this. Would the panelists like to comment on the recent negative PPDs, and PPDs are producer price differentials, and its effect on their economics? Also, what are their thoughts on the federal milk marketing orders and price reforms that may be needed? And so, we can talk about that a little bit. And John, you were saying comments yesterday about what other dairy farmers were thinking on that realm as well. So go ahead, John.
So, I'll let Chris handle the whole mechanics of PPD, but more of the discussion in the neighborhood is more your market, not the federal orders and not the PPD or how that works. It's just, do you belong to a market that's cutting your production, or do you belong to a market that's letting you produce the milk you want to produce? And so that, like Gordie said, that's kind of created a situation of winners and losers here in the neighborhood. If you ship to one market, you're doing really well and business as usual. Ship to another market, you're jumping through all kinds of hoops to cut production and get paid less for what you got left over. So it's kind of a winners and losers on the market end. Federal orders doesn't get discussed.
Gordie?
Yeah, I'm not the guy to answer that, other than, I can't answer that. I'd leave it to the experts who are in finance. To me, I'd love to see us all paid for what our value of milk's worth out there in the market, and to knock out the federal orders. But you're the wrong guy here asking a veterinarian this thing.
Chris, the final word is yours. Maybe unmute.
I think John did a really good job of explaining it. There's a lot of variation right now depending on where you're sending your milk. Certainly there's some things that we might want to re-examine that are kind of anachronisms in the way that federal order pricing works.
Well, that wraps up our episode of Dairy Livestream. Our next episode will be August 19th at the same time, 11 a.m. Central Daylight Time or noon Eastern Time. And I'd like to thank John Mueller of Willow Bend Farm, Gordie Jones of Central Sands Dairy, Chris Wolf of Cornell University, and our team here at Hoard's Dairyman, and Jim Baltz as well for producing this episode. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks.